11 o'clock, so we can go ahead and get started anytime you're ready.
Okay. Well, welcome to our webinar sponsored by the National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery. And I'm Dan Fisher. I'm president of the National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery. Very excited to have you all join us. And our main presenter, Patricia Godsey, is going to share with us the results of a survey that she's done on restraint and seclusion. And she's done a lot of things, so I'm not going to say everything that she's been doing, but the most important thing is that she is a person who has used her lived experience to try to make changes in the system. And some of us just got beaten down and didn't feel we could do anything, but Patricia has used that to try to improve conditions, especially around seclusion and restraint. And she's also a social work student at Portland State University, and she's a doula, and she's an emotional CPR apprentice. And by the way, she also helped start Pure Apocalypse, and she's just done all that in a short period of life. So I'm very, very impressed by Patricia and eager to see everything she's going to share. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dan. I've had the opportunity to work with Dan this year as an intern for the coalition and just learned a lot this year through that process and learned a lot from Dan. And I'm pleased that you're all with us today, and I'm really, I feel really honored to be able to share all of this information with you. Oh, let's get that back. Just assuming you all can see what I see. Put this back in present mode. Like 10 people are telling me exactly what I need to do right now.
At the bottom of that one, it said enter full screen. If you go back to that one.
Sure.
Maybe that'll
do. That's close. Here we go. Here we are. You know, we did an entire practice run a couple of days ago, and we just roll with whatever happens. So I was just saying that I'm super excited that you're all here, and really honored to be able to present this information with you. The people who responded to our 2 surveys, you know, there's a ton of information here, and there's also a ton of experience and wisdom and pain, to be honest. And so I feel really honored to be able to share that all with you today, because hopefully we can take all of this information and do something really important with it. So thank you for being here. As Dan said, I'm Patricia Godsey. I'm a social work student and an intern with the National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery. When I first started with the coalition about a year ago, I was at the Alternatives Conference in DC, and at that time we were all given the most recent policy priorities from the coalition, which were designed, you know, a culmination of the coalition members and organizations coming together to create these priorities. And one of them is to protect and promote the human rights of Americans diagnosed with mental health related conditions. And one of the strategies under that policy priority is ending involuntary treatment and coercive treatments. So as we go through this presentation, there are a few things that I'd just like you to ponder and to keep in your mind. And at the end of the presentation, I'll be asking you all for your guidance and feedback on the presentation and what we do next, really. So I'd like you to think about what moves you most about these results, what you'd like to see us highlight stronger in the future, what recommendations you would make to our legislators and lawmakers based on what we've learned, and what feedback you have about the specific recommendations that we'll show you at the end of the presentation. And then lastly, we'll talk about how can we get the word out? So how can we share this information with even more people? So I'll talk a little bit about how the survey was designed. We developed a steering committee that was made up of people both with lived experience of having been secluded or restrained themselves, and of staff who currently or previously worked for organizations in various settings where seclusion and restraint are used. So I spoke with each steering committee member individually about the project and about their experiences. And I drafted some survey questions based on those collective experiences. The steering committee then looked over those questions and gave a bunch of feedback. And so we revised a few times. And then the final questions were translated into Spanish so that we could increase accessibility. We distributed the surveys to the consumer survivor ex-patient community and to people and groups who we knew were working in settings discussed in the survey. So we left the survey open for about 5 weeks. And after that, we looked at all of the data and analyzed, went through all of it, analyzed it, looked for themes that rose up in the data. And then we created a draft of recommendations based on the data and created this presentation for you all. The stage that we're at today is the first time we're really presenting all of this information to anyone outside of the team that's been working on it. And the goal today is to really get some feedback from you all. And then the next thing we have planned after this is to create and finalize a draft of recommendations. And then we'll be presenting this information again with the recommendations document at Peerpocalypse this year, which is scheduled for July. So that steering committee I talked about, these are the people who were included on that committee: Alexis Garcia, Vic Savicki, Cindy Daniels, Keela Lynn, David Oakes, Dan Fisher, Danita Diamata, and Kathy Savicki. We received 161 surveys overall, and you can see shaded in orange are all of the states where the surveys came in from, and also where people had had different experiences. So we have this NCMHR steering committee that I just talked about, the names that were on the slide 2 previous to this. And we sent the survey out far and wide, and we received 74 surveys back of the staff survey, and then 87 lived experience surveys back. So these were 2 separate surveys that we'll go over the results from both today. We're going to talk about them independently and also how they look when we put them together. And so let's talk about the settings. We asked in the staff survey, for example, we asked the same set of questions about various settings. And so someone may have answered for any or all of the settings where they personally had experience. And if they didn't have experience, they just skipped that set of questions and went to the next setting. Same with the lived experience survey. And so you can see at the bottom here, we asked about people's experiences in schools, psychiatric institutions for youth, psychiatric institutions for adults, nursing homes, and then a setting called Other that I'll tell you more about in a second. So first, we're going to talk about the staff survey results. So there were 74 people who participated in the staff survey from all over the country. And you can see how many people from the various settings. And here's where I'll tell you, this Other included places like jails, prisons, emergency rooms, homes and community settings, hospitals, gymnasiums, migration facilities, and residential treatment settings. So first, we asked a set of questions that people could say yes, no, or unsure. And so I'll go through that information first, and then we'll talk about the content when people were typing in answers about these questions. So we asked for a little bit more information later. So first we asked, in the settings where you worked, were all staff informed or trained in laws and policies regarding seclusion and restraint? So here we're asking, did people know the law? And did they know the policies specific to the organization? So in schools, it's just over half. You can see 55%. In youth psychiatric facilities, 81% of people said that all of the staff were trained, 63% in adult psychiatric units, 100% in nursing homes, and 40% in other settings. So on nursing homes, just for a second, remember from the previous slide that there were only 4 people who answered the staff survey from the perspective of working in a nursing home. And so there's little asterisks by those answers. And that's just to remind you that it won't look the same as the rest because there were only those 4 participants. Next, we asked, were all staff trained in de-escalation? And you can see in almost every setting, more people seem to be trained in de-escalation than in the rules and policies and laws. The one exception there is youth psychiatric units, which was the same in both. Here we ask people, have you ever witnessed instances of seclusion or restraint that you perceived as preventable? This is the first place we're seeing very high numbers. So in schools, 91% of people who took this survey said that they had seen seclusion or restraint performed that could have been prevented. 76% in youth psychiatric units, 68% in adult psychiatric units, half of the people in the nursing homes, and 87% in other settings. So the other thing that I'll point out here is that in the unsure category, you'll see zeros in almost every setting except for other. So this means almost everyone who responded to this survey felt like, yes, I have seen preventable instances, or no, I have not. And that's something interesting because it doesn't really show up like that anywhere else in the data. One person says, I saw instances in which staff chose a hands-on restraint intervention due to their own escalation, rather than using de-escalation techniques in which they had been trained. So we also asked, have you ever seen staff going around policies or laws in order to initiate seclusion and restraint? Here, this number in schools is low. That's really good. We've got about half of people in youth psychiatric units say yes, about half in adult psychiatric units say yes, a quarter in nursing homes, and 40% in other. So these are people who are saying they've seen staff break the rules, essentially, go around the rules so that they can initiate seclusion or restraint. One person gives the example, I have seen some staff catch and release with the idea that if they let go before a certain amount of time, they do not have to document the incident as a restraint. Next, we asked if people had seen staff going around the rules to prolong instances of seclusion or restraint. And so there are laws in place that tell people how long these things are allowed to go on. And this question says, have you seen anyone go around those rules in order to make that longer? These are lower than the initiating numbers, but still significant. So, 18% of people in schools, 28.5% in youth psychiatric units, 42% in adult psychiatric units, a quarter in nursing homes, and 20% in other settings. So we can see that there are staff saying that, yes, we've seen people go around the rules to initiate seclusion and restraint, and while lower, yes, we've also seen people go around the rules to make them last longer. Again, I'll just say, many people also said no to this question, including 73% in schools, which is significant. So this is happening, but it doesn't look like it's as often as going around the rules to start it, to initiate it. Here are some examples of staff going around the rules to either initiate or prolong seclusion and restraint. People talked about intentional escalation to create less work for staff, overstating the danger of the situation, utilizing chemical restraints to sedate people, including using them off-label, keeping people longer because of the assumption that they would re-escalate if released when required by policy or law, and giving a medical reason for restraint because medical restraints tend to have fewer regulations, and then restraining or secluding as a punitive measure for actions such as talking loudly or refusing medication. We asked, have you seen seclusion or restraint used as a punitive measure? Over half of people in schools said yes. A third of people in youth psychiatric units said yes. About 2/3 in adult psychiatric units, about a quarter in nursing homes, and 60% in other settings. So here are some examples. One person says, for talking loudly, yelling, urination outside of the restroom in public areas, for posturing at staff, refusing medication. Someone else says, I've never witnessed actual restraints as a punitive measure, but occasionally staff threatened to restrain someone in a punitive way. This happened more frequently on the child and adolescent units. And you can see that in that youth psychiatric unit section, the number of people who said yes in that setting was about 33%. And so this quote just kind of speaks to at least one person saying, I never saw it happen, but the threat was there in a punitive way. And then we asked staff, have you been negatively impacted by the seclusion and restraint practices in the setting where you worked? And overwhelmingly, more than half of people in every setting said yes. Yes, they personally have been negatively impacted by these practices. So then we're going to talk about some of the themes that came out when we asked people to tell us a little bit more. So people responded to many open-ended questions, and here are the themes that rose to the top. So in the staff survey, first, we've got inappropriate staff behavior. So this came up 113 times in those open-ended questions. People talked about staff using the practice preemptively, the threat of punishment and punishment itself. They talked about power and control and power struggles, retaliation, overreactions, and staff being jaded. The next theme that came out was one of poor working conditions. And so this came up 87 times in the survey. And staff talked about a lack of training, oversight needed. They talked about feeling fear, which keep that one in mind because it comes up again later in the lived experience survey, this idea of staff experiencing fear. People also talked about poor working conditions and said that reduction is possible when there's good leadership in place. The next most common theme was one of trauma. So this came up 64 times. People talked about the settings not being trauma informed. They talked about it being re-traumatizing for people and also traumatic for staff. And then we have this theme of restraints and seclusion being morally wrong or making things worse. So many people said that this practice, that they saw this practice making things worse, that it creates mistrust, that it's harmful and morally wrong, and that it can increase reactivity. We saw this 38 times in this survey. We asked people about we asked staff what they felt was the impact of these practices on the people who were being secluded and restrained. One person says it was pure and simple abuse and torture that will intensify earlier instances of trauma they have suffered and cause them to be more fearful and distressed in the future, possibly their whole lives. So I'd like to take a moment and just look at the themes of the two surveys. So in the center here, you'll see these are the themes that came up in both surveys. So the idea that it's morally wrong and makes things worse, inappropriate staff behavior, and trauma. These came up in both surveys. In the staff survey, we also saw this theme that we just talked about regarding poor working conditions. And then in the lived experience survey, we saw the need for connection and compassion and people saying, just talk to me. And then this idea that training and oversight is needed and that change is possible. So now we'll talk about the lived experience survey. There were 87 participants in this survey, and you can see the breakout in the settings below. This time we have 9 people who responded from nursing homes as opposed to the 4 in the staff survey. And you'll see the most responses that we got were from people in adult psychiatric settings who had been restrained or secluded in an adult psychiatric unit at 49 people. So we asked this group, had you not been restrained or secluded, would you have hurt yourself or someone else? And we asked this as a partner to the staff question about, do people know the laws and policies? Because in many of these settings, there's a bar that people are not able to initiate these practices unless someone is imminently hurting themselves or someone else, or going to hurt themselves or someone else in the immediate future. And so we asked people, if this hadn't happened, would you have hurt yourself or someone else? And you'll see the highest number of yeses here is from the youth psychiatric setting, and that's still only 1/4 of people who responded to the survey. Something else in the other category, there's 0%. So 0 people in those other locations, which remember included jails and prisons and hospitals, community settings. 0% of people in those categories, in those settings, said that they would have hurt themselves or someone else. And then we have 18% in schools, 12% in adult psychiatric units, and 12.5% in nursing homes. So pretty low numbers here. Then we asked people who had been restrained or secluded, do you feel that the incidents could have been prevented? So 82% of people in schools say yes, 70% in youth psychiatric units, 91% of people in adult psychiatric units said yes, it could have been prevented, 62.5% in nursing homes, and 79% in other settings. So here I'll also just point out in adult psychiatric units, there were 0 people who said no to this question. 9% said unsure. So one person says, the person can be talked to. In many cases, my behavior was out of fear of what was happening. Now I'll just ask you to remember back to the staff survey for a second, and I want to take a closer look at that adult psychiatric unit response. So we asked staff, have you ever witnessed instances of seclusion or restraint that you perceived as preventable? And only 68% said that they had ever seen an instance that was preventable. But here we have 91% of the people in the lived experience survey saying that what happened to them could have been prevented. Someone says it makes people less likely to trust other people and makes recovery and healing harder to come to. So now let's take a look at those themes, a little bit of a closer look in the lived experience survey. So here again, the theme that we have rise to the very top is inappropriate staff behavior. Here we see it 167 times. People described that there was nothing helpful that the staff had done. People talked about power and control, neglect, abuse, the threat of punishment. They talked about injury and staff aggression and about poor staff behavior and gave many examples. When we asked people, a little more context for that idea of nothing, not a thing, when we asked people, did staff do anything that was helpful? 37% of the people who responded typed out some version of nothing or not a thing in response to this question. So again, this wasn't a question that people were filling in a bubble. This was people answering an open-ended question about what had been helpful. Because of that, this is a surprisingly high number and something really significant that came out of this research. So in addition, people talked about tending to injuries, access to medical treatment, not acting afraid, which was something that I said that we would come back to, this idea of staff fear and how that can intensify the situation. People also said that allowing space was helpful, as well as legal assistance, being understanding, and providing snacks, books, and entertainment. So the second thing that rises to the top, the second theme, is this idea of it being morally wrong or making things worse. So it was very common for there to be responses saying that the practice itself was morally wrong and that it shouldn't exist or shouldn't be practiced. People also talked about it being scary and experiencing fear and said that it just makes things worse and that it increased their loss of respect or trust with the staff and also with people in their personal lives. Many people talked about the desire to avoid mental health treatment after having been restrained or secluded. And this one, you can see, came up 145 times in this survey. So people described that mistrust and fear. One person says, "I'm afraid to talk to mental health professionals for fear I will be locked up." Someone else says, "I've had times when I needed intense therapy or more medication. I stay home rather than allowing myself to be institutionalized and risk being held and abused." And here we can see how often it came up in both surveys. So this theme was a common theme between the two surveys, but in the staff survey, we saw it 38 times, and in the lived experience survey, we saw it 145 times. One person says these practices would in most cases be a crime if committed by anyone outside of an institution. The next theme we'll talk about is this idea of needing connection, compassion, and people saying, "Talk to me." And that was the most common in this theme, was someone to write out some version of "just talk to me," if they had just talked to me, if we had just had an opportunity to communicate. People described needing compassion and comfort and empathy, and also talked about wanting their immediate needs met with things like snacks and food. And then people also said they needed acceptance, respect, patience, and hope. This came up 74 times. This person says, "The person can be talked to. In many cases, my behavior was out of fear of what was happening." And this, I believe, is the first time here. So the art that's on this slide and the art that you'll see in the rest of the presentation was created by my friend and colleague, Rachel Kitterman, who is an artist and a fellow social work student at Portland State University. Just brilliant work. So the next theme that we saw come up in the lived experience survey was this idea of trauma. Many people talked about the practice of seclusion and restraint and having been secluded or restrained being traumatic for them, including having a lasting impact on their lives. And several people talked about PTSD so people talked about this in two ways. They talked about their existing PTSD being severely triggered, and they also talked about PTSD that initiated from this experience of having been restrained or secluded. This person says, "There was no one speaking. I was physically thrown against the wall, thrown to the floor. 4 men sat on top of me. The brazen lack of care for my physical well-being shows how little my life meant to those in charge of my life." And I'll tell you here that this is not the only person who talked about how scary it is to have several people coming at them in one of these settings, preparing to initiate a seclusion or restraint. The next theme that came up was this idea of training and oversight needed. So people with lived experience talked about there needing to be training, supervision, oversight, and investigation. They said there aren't enough staff in some settings, especially, this one came up especially in schools. People talked about there being a need for more de-escalation skills, and that there needed to be more support people and more proactive and preventative approaches. And several people reminded us that alternatives do exist and that change is possible. This person says, they treated me as if I was a small child and talked to me as if I wasn't able to make meaningful decisions for myself. They gave me no other choices that might have helped me deal in a more thoughtful way. Another person says, in the children's world, the adult staff are always believed. The child often doesn't have a voice, and that voice is discredited. Just a little note about this piece of art, again by Rachel Kitterman. The person who's depicted in the center of this art piece, her name is Judith Scott, and she spent the majority of her life in an institution and was a brilliant artist who used textiles and string to wrap objects and create these beautiful art pieces. And the story goes that she would often use items that she found around the unit and incorporate them into her art pieces, including one story about a key that a staff person had left lying out somewhere. Really beautiful piece of art. So I don't want to end the presentation portion of this webinar without talking about this idea that restraints and seclusion are necessary or helpful. So this idea is what keeps these practices in place. And I'll tell you from the many surveys that we received from both staff and people with lived experience, I want to show you how few times those concepts came up in this survey. And so here we have the staff survey where it came out 26 times. And it was common in both surveys for these responses, when it did come up, for it to also have a qualifier. So someone saying, you know, it could have a good outcome, or saying sometimes it's necessary for threatening or dangerous behavior, and that debriefing can help. So I'll just say again, this did come up. It came up very few times, but it's worth mentioning because it's what's in the sort of narrative of our country that allows these practices to continue. In the lived experience survey, it also came up a few times, 12 to be exact. And in this survey, it was even more tentative. So people were saying only if the person is immediately being violent, someone is immediately being hurt, and it should be used on rare occasion. One person a few times said, you know, this didn't really have an impact on me. Someone said at one time that the staff were following the rules, or that the practice kept them safe, or that it woke them up. And then I think just thinking back, sort of contrasting these ideas with the results that we got about this being a preventative practice, and how common it was for someone to say that what had happened to them could have been prevented. So just kind of like, you know, remembering and holding that truth while we're looking at these results. So I'd like to go back to some of these questions that I asked you to ponder at the beginning of the presentation. These first two, I'd like to hear what moved you about these results, and then also about what you'd like to see us highlight stronger in future presentations.
And this is Oryx from behind the scenes. Hello, everyone. If you could just type your answers into your question function or your chat function, then we can see them.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Thanks, Oryx. I'm just looking through some of the questions that came through while I was talking, but also please, if you've got responses to these two questions, let us know.
Well, here are the responses that I'm seeing come in.
Sure.
Focused on direct supervision for staff.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lack of staff orientation conducted by peers in institutional settings. There's also a lack of physician training as their quote license.
Okay.
Change is possible, yet the individual and the services is not involved in the process.
Mm-hmm.
In the future staff surveys, it would be helpful to segregate as tech have more firsthand experience than nurses, and physicians are even farther removed from the
Mm-hmm. To kind of separate those out so that we're hearing from people who have more close day-to-day contact with people versus maybe weekly or even longer. Yeah, great. There are many, yeah, I'm just thinking through some of these responses, and this research is really at the very beginning stages. It's really tough to find research about restraint and seclusion in the US. And so, of course, this survey brought up many more questions. And I hope to be able to contribute to some of the future answers, and I hope that other people will too.
Okay, and we have a comment from someone who needs to leave soon.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, I need to leave the webinar soon, but I have a question on a research aspect. Are there any longitudinal studies that show life trajectory / outcomes for individuals discharged and have experienced seclusion and restraint one time or more?
Gosh, that's such a great question.
In a similar look like the ACE incidence and health life outcomes?
It's a great question. So I did not find anything like that. There is research on outcomes. I mean, what's on the top of my head when I hear that question is Robert Whitaker's book. But so I know that there's information about outcomes post hospitalization, but I don't think that any of those studies have taken into consideration restraint and seclusion. I think that would be a new branch of research that sounds really important and intriguing to me.
And there's a comment about, I think, what they'd like to see highlighted in the future, restraints in ER settings. I'd like to know more about the long-term effects of seclusion and restraint.
Yeah, long-term effects. I'm just making some notes.
And then another comment, the data needs to be shown to professionals so that there's a more open dialogue between people with quote power and the people subjected to restraint.
Yeah, I agree.
And then another comment, it reminded me that I am not alone in my experiences. It seems that others, both staff and those with lived experience, see the need for change.
Yeah.
I would like to first say that the questions move me, that these types of questions are rarely asked.
Yeah.
So thank you for asking the questions.
Yeah, thank you. It's really important.
I thought it was powerful that the staff and lived experience surveys both saw inappropriate use of seclusion and restraint.
Yeah, yeah. I found that pretty promising.
Here's a question. There's a couple other questions. Do you want to get to questions later and continue with the presentation? Or?
Well, there are a couple of other questions that I would like to ask people to hear their responses, as long as there's a way to kind of track everyone's questions as we go, because I don't want to miss anything. And then of course, whatever we don't happen to have time for at the end, I'll give you my contact information and also how to get in touch with the coalition. And so we can continue the conversation after this 90 minutes is over too.
Okay, there's great, and we have a good amount of time left, but
great.
So another comment: amazing presentation. The differences between staff and lived experience responses are striking, especially with what was helpful and whether or not it could have been prevented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks.
And another comment: definitely focus on the aspect of re-traumatization.
Mm-hmm. Great.
We need to distinguish between a staff experiencing fear versus the actions being frightening. One of the factors identified which, quote, helped was staff not acting afraid. And I personally rarely saw an agitated person truly ready to be aggressive.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Yeah, staff need training and experience in facing discomfort without feeling the source and imminent violence.
Mm-hmm. Experiencing discomfort.
And
and not kind of confusing discomfort for danger, right? I think that's kind of at the crux of that comment.
Mm-hmm. It is sad that we are still that we still need to use this method and that we do not engage the person. Oh, what struck this person the most was, quote, just talk to me.
Yeah. Oh, so many times that came up. So many times people said, this could have been avoided if you had just talked to me, if someone had just shown me a little bit of compassion, answered my question, treated me like a human.
And then, wow, these are great comments. Appreciate your participation.
Yeah, this is wonderful.
Another one, the use of physical restraint due to the fear of the staff instead of the necessity for it. Are youth not being heard? As adults, we need to understand that they do have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Training, and more training on fear and control.
Mm-hmm.
And another one on staff being educated on restraint policy.
Yeah, in some settings especially, that number was lower than I expected to see.
Mm-hmm. It would be interesting to note which de-escalation trainings were conducted. Are there trainings that create more peaceful settings so restraint is not necessary? And I think you're going to get to that.
Yeah, it's a good question. We have a couple of ideas for recommendations for training, but one of the things that I know about the trainings that exists currently, especially in places like psychiatric units for youth and adults, is that it's typically one training that starts with de-escalation and goes all the way up to restraints. And so I guess I just still have a question about if that's the right way, right? And questions about, because I don't know all of the training methods that exist in the entire country. I know a handful of them, and the ones that I know work like that. So I think that that's an interesting question and something that we need to keep looking at.
By the way, people can see your email now, so I don't know.
Yeah, it just popped up. I'm trying to get it to go away. I don't know. Go away.
While you do that, I'll read
Here we
another
go.
comment.
Sorry
All
about
right.
that.
I thought it was interesting that both sides pointed out that it was used for power or control of the situation. When both sides are fighting for the upper hand, then they're not listening to each other.
Can you say that again?
I thought it was interesting that both sides pointed out that it was used for power or control of the situation. When both sides are fighting for the upper hand, then they're not listening to each other.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just say that in that situation, there's one party that has more power than the other.
Yeah. I think that's what I was listening for that second time.
There's huge imbalance of power.
Right. And in both surveys, people were saying that staff were exerting power and control. So I'm not positive if that was super clear when I was talking about it earlier. But the power and control comments were exclusively about staff exerting that power.
Okay, and then what moved me the most, I would say, is the different age groups, adolescents, nursing homes, etc. Restraint and seclusion is occurring unlawfully.
Yeah, across the lifespan.
Yeah, right. However, I'm not overly surprised. I worked in an adolescent group home with teens, females, and this was occurring. It did not sit morally right with me and was overpowered by other staff. I was unable to continue working at that facility. Using this incorrectly is traumatizing, adds to individuals' PTSD, and escalates a situation. Very sad.
Yeah. You know, I have some questions related to that comment, just in the research and in what we can look into in the future, because I wonder about, so there were lots of people, there were a handful of people in the surveys who talked about having to leave work at environments because it was too much, and because when they tried to speak up or say something about it, there was a lot of fear of retaliation or overt retaliation against that person. And so it just makes me wonder about who stays in these jobs and who goes, and then how is that impacting the future of the practice.
This was a comment. We say we are trauma informed. Are we?
Yeah, great question.
Provision of suggestions from individuals served what things that work best for them to prevent use of seclusion restraint. In terms of what to highlight in the future.
Yeah, that's a good question. There are one piece of kind of future research that I would love to see is that there are places that have successfully reduced seclusion and restraint in that organization by quite a bit. And some places they've been able to reduce it completely. And I would love to see some research around those organizations and what exactly they did. And yeah, just what that process looked like from kind of beginning to end. I know a lot of times it starts with a leadership change in the handful of experiences that I've seen.
We have a comment. Allow peer providers on site.
Yeah.
The staff need to be taught that de-escalation and making a connection with the person, quote, needing restraint, so that the numbers decrease or can be abolished.
Well, maybe we'll, if it seems like an okay time to you, go to the next question. And I'm sure there are more, and we'll be able to see these after the fact, right, Orcs?
Whatever we don't get to, if folks could just email Patricia directly, that's the easiest way, and she'll put her contact info up at the end.
Yeah. Great. So the next question that I'd like to hear some of your responses to is, what recommendations would you make to our legislators, our lawmakers, on what we learned here? And I heard a few already, about having peers involved in working in various settings, about training. Just looking at my notes here. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, folks could address this question. We'll read some of your recommendations.
Mm-hmm. And maybe while people are typing and thinking about specific recommendations, I'll go to this next slide and just go through some of the recommendations that our work group wanted to put forward. These are some sort of systems level recommendations. So we talked about recommending that we create state and federal restraint and seclusion oversight committees, and that we start to track all incidences of restraint and seclusion and make this information available to the public. We talked about creating statewide plans to reduce restraint and seclusion and requiring universal training in trauma-informed care and improving working conditions for employees, including adequate staffing, increased supervision, which someone else mentioned in the previous question, and then high quality trainings in compassionate communication and de-escalation. And the couple of specific recommendations that we have for training are emotional CPR and nonviolent communication. Those are just a couple of ideas. So my question here is, do you have feedback or additional recommendations?
There's a comment that came in. I would like to see the discontinuation of seclusion rooms in hospitals. It makes absolutely no sense to me that when folks are experiencing such a high level of distress, that seclusion is considered. That is the time providers choose to leave people by themselves in a seclusion room with those intense experiences.
Yeah.
These times people need more support, not to be separated from that support.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. It's a great recommendation. And it reminds me of one of the comments that came up in the survey, a story that I'll relay to you, kind of the basics. There was a person who talked about working in a peer support role in a psychiatric unit, and there being space given to her to engage with the person while in seclusion. And so, it's nowhere near what you're talking about here, which is abolishing the rooms in general, but kind of spoke to that same idea of why are we leaving people all alone when things are so intense and so painful. And so this was one way that she was able to kind of reduce that impact by being with her and just staying together. Yeah, thank you for that idea, that comment.
All right, and this one is wondering if a survey has been done with providers who have eliminated seclusion and restraint on cost savings. Should be a game changer. I know of a few places that have moved from seclusion and restraint years ago.
Great. Gosh, that's such a great question. I wonder if that person would email me with some more information about that. Yeah, I'd love to hear more.
And are you planning to write a paper for academic journals? This data needs to be published.
That's a great question. And kind of goes with the next thing that I'm going to ask everyone about. I do have a plan to write a research paper if that's possible. Right now, what I need is someone to partner with who knows about the journals and can help get it published. And so I'm in conversation with a couple of people at Portland State University, but also if you all know of someone who would like to partner with me to get this work published, that would be fantastic. Yeah, I would love to hear more about that. It's definitely part of the plan. And so I think with that, I'll go to this next slide, which is the final question that we have for you all. How can we get the word out about this? you know, this presentation exists now. And like I said, at Peerpocalypse, we're going to do a session on this research. And in that, rather than asking all of the questions that we're asking today so that we can get your amazing, thank you so much for it, your amazing feedback, we're going to be sharing the recommendations document and talking about what else we've been able to get in the works since today. But what other ideas do you have? And also, this is an invitation to email me if you know other people who might want to hear this information, or, you know, at the beginning of the project, we talked about getting it out into the media. So if there are people who know folks who write articles, or yeah, I guess I'll just let that trail off so that I can hear your ideas.
Wow, there's a lot.
Wonderful.
I'm sifting through. We can definitely get back to some of these comments and questions. Okay, you can getting the word out through training. There's a comment that this information should be used in trainings that folks are doing.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, thanks.
If you got ideas, let us know and I'll read them. There's a lot of questions.
Yeah, go ahead. Either way, Oryx, we've got plenty of time left, so I really want to spend the rest of the time just hearing from people. So anything that people have, just let me know.
Okay, I'm going. There's just a ton. I'm going to start at that. I'm going to start at the end and see if we. Okay, yeah. Here we go. Here we got some responses to this question. Get the ACLU to take this on as a civil rights issue.
Yeah, I have been thinking about the ACLU quite a bit.
NARPA in Portland this fall. Present to NARPA, and if it's, I think they will want to have this even if you're late on the workshop thing. We can all advocate for you to get in, right? Yeah, just present the results at conferences. I think is a good recommendation. Once you get published, the word can get out more quickly. Please check peer support publications. I'm sure there'll be someone there who would partner with you. Another manner would be to look to CPS training courses.
Great.
Getting it out to disability rights organizations. That's a great suggestion. Every state has a PAMI, our disability rights organization, and those organizations would be very interested in this.
Great idea.
Oh, and here we go. State hospitals have a conference and present information to each other. Perhaps talking to the people on the Seclusion and Restraint committees at state hospitals about your research would be helpful.
Great. State hospital. I didn't know that they did that. It's so helpful. Talk to sticky notes.
Organize peer organizations to send emails to elected officials regarding the misuse of seclusion and restraint.
Yeah, I was thinking about, on that note, once we get the recommendations document solidified, I was thinking about drafting like a version of a letter that people could send that they could then change to make their own, but just giving people some general language that really talks about what we found in the research. So if that feels like it would be helpful, I can work on that.
Okay, and those are some great recommendations on how to get the word out.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for those. And please, if you have specific, like a person to contact or someone you know might be interested in hearing more about this, please feel free to email them to me. I'll put that slide with my contact information.
And so folks know we have a NARPA board member on, and NARPA is actually canceled this year due to the crisis.
Yeah, okay.
Just so folks know, NARPA is not happening.
Thank you for that information. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, she says she's sharing it with the DRCT PAMI Advisory Council and with Ian at NDRN, National Disability Rights Network.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. And there's Trisha's contact information if we don't get to your question. But let's want to just go into more questions and comments.
Yeah, let's go back up. Well, one thing, just because I don't want to run out of time before this happens, is I just want to take a moment to say thank you to some people. So this is a group of people who've really supported me in this process throughout the year, and especially in the creation of this presentation, and just supported me in going through all of the data and figuring out how to share it so that it works the best. So that group includes Alexis Garcia, Cindy Daniels, Maria Ross, Maria Covernali, Rachel Kitterman, Kathy Savicki, and Dan Fisher and Anita Olson. So just a little moment to say thank you so much to everyone on that list and everyone else who's shared the webinar and who plans to share this information in the future. I really feel like this is a place where we can make a difference, and we know that change is possible. Someone on the webinar already said that they also have seen places that have been able to reduce and eliminate the use of seclusion and restraint. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to some specific people, and then also just to everyone. And then yeah, now we can spend the whole rest of the time with your questions and your comments. It's really fantastic.
We have about a half hour, so
yeah, that's great.
On the theme of how to get the word out, there's a question: is there a talk listserv where people could share information of what works best, what issues they are having, etc.?
Great question. What I know of is on this contact information slide, the NCMHR Google groups. I see people sharing lots of great information on there and really having good conversations about specific topics. And so that might be a place where we can start this conversation. I'm interested to hear what other people have to say too.
Okay, I'm sharing the website. If you go to the website, you can register to become a member and be a part of that listserv on NCMHR.
Awesome, thank you.
Lots of questions about the webinar being recorded. Yes, it is recorded. It will be available on the same website, the National Coalition website, ncmhr.org.
That's right.
Great presentation, thank you. Another on getting the word out: target individual hospitals to get them to videotape all incidents of seclusion and restraint so that higher ups can see the reality.
Oh, that's interesting. So not to share with people outside, but to share with their own leadership. It's a great idea.
This person recommends publishing in medical-based journals as well as peer journals. You can publish in more than one place, and sometimes the medical journals are better received by the system folks.
Great idea. Yeah.
Person saying they would love to see a letter that they can share with their Congress people.
Good. Okay. Yep.
This person says, if you do go to legislators, have personal stories to go with the data. Use the quote, "stories change laws."
Yeah, that's right. And in addition to the quotes that we've provided on the slides, there's a PDF that's attached to this webinar, and there are several more quotes included in the PDF. And so if you need other stories to draw from, you can see things that people actually wrote in response to the questions on the survey. Yeah, please feel free to use those. We've taken away all of the identifying information, just like on here. So you can see the quote, but no information about the person that it's attached to. So they're all anonymous because of the way that we've kind of got it organized.
Okay,
Please feel free to use those.
A question came in terms of, are you planning on doing more of this research, opening up the survey to more respondents, or is this finished basically?
It's a good question. This round is definitely finished. We've got the questions that I'd be happy to share with other people if someone else wants to duplicate this survey, this set of surveys and research, and I can kind of talk people through how I came to the information about the themes. But yeah, I can share the information, and there might be future research, and I have lots of ideas about things to do in the future. One thing is that my internship with the coalition is coming to an end, but that doesn't mean that I'm anywhere near finished talking about or advocating for change in this area. So while I won't be an intern with the coalition any longer, yeah, I'm still interested, and so if there are opportunities for me to continue the research, I will definitely do that. Just like if there are opportunities for me to continue presenting, I'll continue that as well.
Okay. A suggestion, you might want to talk to Nev Jones about CSX-led research.
Oh, great. I can't see who made that comment, but would you mind?
Becky Child made the comment. Becky.
Oh, hi, Becky. Would you email me Nev's information? That'd be really helpful.
I can email you Nev's information too.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah.
Would be good idea to do follow-up research about restraint and seclusion at prisons. I think there's probably more going on there than even hospitals.
Yes, so many people commented about this throughout the process, and I'm absolutely completely in support of doing this work in that population. You know, we saw a small handful of responses from people who worked for or had been restrained or secluded in jails or prisons in the other setting category. But I would love to see more research done in that area for sure. Part of, well, I don't think I mentioned this before, but the way that we came up with the settings is that these are the settings that are currently listed in the NCMHR policy priorities. And anyway, that is to say that I would love to see more research in jails and prisons and about this practice as well.
Okay, this one is, there's a lot of work going on by various different individuals and groups to reduce seclusion restraint. Is there a way they can band together and join forces, creating a coalition with more collective power?
That is always the question, isn't it? Yeah, I would love that. I would love to be connected, to even more connected with some of the other individuals and groups who are doing this work. It feels like a great next step.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend joining the national coalition, and the coalition can do a subgroup that's focused. That's one idea.
It's a great idea.
It says, bring it into the CNA, LPN, and RN classroom. So yeah, bring it into the curriculum that's teaching future professionals.
Great idea. Yeah.
And someone just letting us know that there's someone from PAMI in the audience, and I know that there's folks from hospitals. There's a diversity of folks on this webinar.
Yeah, welcome. It's wonderful. I'm really just like delighted to be able to share this information with a broad audience. I think it's really important, and I'm interested to hear, different perspectives and what we might be able to do next, and to, work together to reduce this practice, because as we can see in the results of this research, staff and people with lived experience have some, quite a lot of common ideas about reducing the practice and about what could be happening instead. So yeah, thank you for being here.
And my friend and colleague Latasha Taylor says, I sit on a seclusion and restraint committee in Connecticut that would love to hear this information.
Oh, great. Yeah, I would love that. Let's get in touch after this. That'd be great.
A recommendation to work with disability rights attorneys, activists, etc., similar to the working with disability rights, the state organizations. This is a comment about critical incident response. Investigations often just look to see where, quote, blame is set for the incident. Staff HR action taken. Practice outside of these groups needs to require deeper digging to get preventable parts, so can recognize need to change the practice.
I agree completely. I sat on a critical incident review committee for maybe 6 years, and that one was really interesting because it also involved people with lived experience. And the times when I saw it work best were when we kept up at the big picture, right? So when we were talking about what systemically is going on that's allowing this to continue, and what can we do as a system or as a community to make a change, right? To prevent things like this from happening again. Yeah, definitely. The more we can stay at that big picture, the better. There were people in the survey, I'll tell you, who responded by saying that we need more accountability for specific staff. And typically it was people talking about specific egregious actions that were happening and wanting accountability for the things that happened to them. And so I don't want to discount that at all. And I also want to say that there's a place here for big picture conversations. Yeah. I think it's really, really important to think through both of those.
All right, and this says, several years ago, I saw a presentation about the Grafton School in Virginia. They had changed their procedures on seclusion and restraint, backed it up with systematic training and supportive staff. The school reports drastic decreases in seclusion restraint as well as student and staff injuries. The benefits also included increased staff retention and decrease in the school's liability insurance premiums.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'll look into it, the Grafton School. Thank you.
This is another friend and colleague, Ben Cooley Hall, recommending public awareness campaigns, maybe when staff only hear it in trainings with their institutions or within the mental health field, it makes less of an impression than raising the issue in the arena of general public discourse.
Yeah, such a great idea. Yep. Increases accountability too. And I think, one thing that I've seen happen is when people are only talking to other people who are doing things the same way because they sort of live under the same policies, it's hard to sort of look up past that, even to see, like other people have talked about the places where they have been able to reduce these practices. And so I think that a public awareness campaign can do a lot of good in that area too. Yeah, good idea.
So this comment is there needs to be oversight and authority to change practice, not just be advisory in nature.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
All trainings that certify folks as, I think they're talking about peer specialists, could include this in their trainings. This is part of mandatory abuse reporting.
That's a great idea. It's interesting to think about this as mandatory abuse reporting when there were so many staff who were saying that they were afraid of retaliation when they reported. And so I like the idea of kind of introducing that concept in the beginning when people are being onboarded, so that there's a clear understanding from everyone involved that is the expectation. Yeah, good idea.
This person's recommending creating handouts to get the word out, handouts, brochures, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This person's saying look into modifications and layout design of spaces and consider outdoor access as a good possible de-escalation technique.
Yeah. Outdoor access. Good idea. And prevention, right?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely people in the survey a couple of times were talking about, there's just so many people crammed together that it's tough to just feel okay all the time because of just the numbers sometimes. It's hard to get away and have space to themselves. Yeah, people made quite a few comments like that.
Recommendation to check out, again from Latasha, check out the PRCH with Yale to work with the data, and a name Sherelle Bellamy, Chyrell, Bellamy, Belhamy.
Awesome. Thank you.
Make sure that the state, and it's a recommendation, make sure the state and federal seclusion and restraint oversight committees have jurisdiction over forensic settings as well. So my current institution believe that the forensic correctional dimension of the setting somehow justifies using seclusion and restraint in ways that are not legal. For example, punishment.
You said punishment?
Yeah, to use they use punishment.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. It's really important.
Will the Q&A transcript be available? Yes, this whole webinar is being recorded. So it will be available audio. I don't know if there's a plan to transcribe this. If you really want it transcribed, contact Trisha at her email. We'll see.
Yeah, it's actually a question that I had as well. This is my first time presenting on this platform, and so I wasn't exactly sure what it was capable of. But if there's a way to see the text after the fact, I would love that.
This person says, I believe they will have tremendous impact when sharing this information with upper level management and service provider orgs who sometimes don't often believe these are real and often real and occurring issues.
Yeah, that was part of my hope for this project, was just to have a place where we could collect all of this information so that, you know, it would be less likely that we would be facing scrutiny from or toward an individual person about their individual story, right? And so just to show that this is happening all over the place in all kinds of different settings, and you know, that it's not just one person and it's not just a complaint, that, you know, there really is some credence behind this. And so that was part of my motivation for collecting it all together like this. So I hope that that's true.
Okay, recommendations to legislators. The training I had received regarding restraint was to read a one-pager regarding the do's and don'ts. This was not discussed with the employer. I think this training needs to be a high-quality training, also a safe space that person is able to engage with a staff member versus being isolated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's it. Yeah.
I wonder.
Training they got.
I wonder if that person. Sorry, I can't see who made that comment, but I wonder if you would mind sharing. It doesn't have to be in the webinar. Maybe with me personally, like the type of setting that that's from. I know that different types of settings have currently different rules and regulations about training, and yeah, so I'm just curious to learn more about that, about what different settings require right now.
Here's a comment, another comment from Becky. Many people recommend training, but training that is done on a one-time basis is not very effective. I like the idea of collaborative problem solving with live coaching on the floor with nonviolent communication and de-escalation training coaches on the floor.
Coaches on the floor on an ongoing basis so that people can interact with them while they're doing work and kind of check in with them about specific situations that they've been engaged in. Yeah. Just making a note about that. Great idea. Thanks, Becky.
Ruth Holman from Share is sharing that they have a Share peer toolkit which has 29 tools to de-escalate situations.
Oh, I feel like I've seen that before.
Yeah, that's Share !
Okay.
So look up their organization.
Yeah. I wonder, would you be willing to send that to my email so that I can attach it to future presentations and kind of share it with people that we do this presentation with in the future? We can, yeah, maybe email me. We can talk more about how to make that happen. But I would love to share that information with people as well.
We have a comment. Thank you. Great work. Thank you deeply.
Thank you.
Let's see if we can get some more comments.
Yeah.
There needs to be more representation from those with lived experiences on oversight work groups and committees.
I agree.
Unfortunately, with the pay that some staff get, staff don't feel as they have to put up with, quote, dangerous situations, such as client getting agitated. So restraint gets used more. If we pay more, people may think differently.
Yeah, there was lots of information in the surveys too, just about improving working conditions, and, you know, people, including staff, saying that they felt like at least some of this has to do with people feeling disempowered in their jobs, not feeling like they had the support that they needed, and even not feeling comfortable, you know, coming forward to have conversations about changes because not feeling supported by people in leadership roles. And I think there was also just a sense of kind of dismay about the rules and policies the way that they are, and people saying, you know, yeah, we were trained, but here are ways that I see people going around the rules. And so I think that it's definitely important to look at that component.
Here's a comment from Gail Bluebird. Training was done by NASHBID a few years ago at state hospitals all over the country called 6 core strategies.
Kevin core strategies.
Kevin Huckshorn was the lead person. One outcome was comfort rooms that were established but don't know the status of them. Also have a video that was made called Leaving the Door Open. So have you
cool. Okay.
Are you familiar with the 6 core strategies and how that's a resource that she shared?
Yeah, thank you. I read them in preparation for this work and as we were putting the surveys together, but it's a great time to go back to them too, especially now that we're in the stage of, you know, putting together recommendations, and maybe we can fold that into the recommendations that we put forward here. Yeah, thank you for that reminder.
A comment, staffing ratios are really important. When you have more staff, you're able to practice other de-escalation tactics.
That came up a few times in the surveys too. Yeah, thanks for that reminder. Staffing ratios.
All right, here's a comment from someone who had to leave. Thank you for your research and presentation. I experienced a lot of seclusion and restraint from age 15 to 35. Most traumatic experience of my life, and I have an ACE score of 9. Means a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
I'm 56 now, and it's had a lasting effect on my life. Still advocating against it and for systems transformation.
Thank you for that work. You're not here anymore, but if you come back and listen to this, thank you for that work. And just really to anyone else who's listening in a similar situation, it's really admirable that you're here and you keep working toward changes. I appreciate it. I appreciate all of you so much.
Another good recommendation, Ellis Admer or AMDR is a good resource for de-escalation training. Ellis, AMDUR, AMDR.
AMDUR. Thank you. Ellis, is it ELLIS?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Wonderful.
Yeah, there's a lot. I'm appreciating all the hospital staff who took the time to be here today. And we're getting to the end here.
Yeah.
Oh, here's a question that's very relevant
Great.
to the time that I don't know if we'll be able to answer it, but has anyone seen a spike in restraints during this current COVID crisis? Or has
such a good question.
Down.
I was thinking about this literally when I woke up this morning. I was thinking about this presentation and thinking about what's happening right now and just wondering how it's impacting those settings. I wonder too if anyone has answers about that. Yeah, please let us know. Probably a good place to put answers to that question is on the NCMHR Google group too. Would be a good place to continue that conversation. I think it's something we really need to be keeping an eye on.
We did have one response so far. We've seen a spike in assaultive behaviors, which occasionally has led to seclusion restraints. So.
I just wonder about the fear in that situation, right? The fear that people must be experiencing. I mean, all the fear that we're all experiencing outside of institutions, and then layered on top of that, just having to be in a situation where you're constantly around other people and not able to, in some cases, do the social distancing that's being recommended to all of us. And in some cases, I know not having access to the news and up-to-date information the way that people might when they're at home. Yeah,
And this,
I have.
this
Mhm.
is a response from Ben. Yes and no. Patients at our hospital are confined to their rooms most of the day to prevent the spread of the virus. It's aimed at safety, but unfortunately it ends up effectively meaning seclusion.
Yeah. Thanks for that comment.
And
Yeah.
that brings us to the end of the webinar.
Great. Great. Thank you, Orcs, for going through those questions and comments for us, and for hosting us here. This has been really helpful. I super appreciate everyone's comments and ideas. Yeah, and please, here's how you can contact me in the future, and also how you can stay in touch with the coalition. And Orcs also shared the coalition's website where this will be posted. Yeah, I really appreciate everyone.